Good morning, everybody. My name's Liz Ford. I'm the Partnership Development Manager for the Gangmasters Labour Abuses Authority. A quick show of hands in the room. Has everybody heard of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority? Well, that's great, because I did this a few weeks ago and only 2 people put their hands up, and the first one was the person that was organising it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the GLA, what we do, and it's mainly on land, but there is always a supply chain that needs some work on land, and what we can do in the future. So we were set up mainly to identify and tackle worker exploitation in the agricultural industry. But the reason that we were born, if you like, was as a result of the Chinese cockle pickers that were recruited into the UK, having paid Chinese snakehead gangs thousands of dollars in order to come to the UK to work. And what that did was to shine a light on migrant low-skilled labour that was coming into the UK. Where were they being employed and who was looking after them? So we run temporary, we look at workers if they're temporary or brought into labour by agencies, and we run a licensing scheme, and we found this has been very, very successful within the food and drink industry. Well, we prevent worker exploitation, and it's all about vulnerable people, and these are very vulnerable people. Parosha has alluded to it in her speech just now. These are people that really don't have a voice, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. We tackle unlicensed criminal activity, and there's another strand to this. This is all about money. This is about vulnerable people, and it's about the ability to make as much money out of that individual as is possible. And so what we're all about at the GLA is about tackling and disrupting organised criminality, those organised crime groups that can be anything from an extended family, large family, to real multinational organised crime groups. So in identifying and tackling forced and bonded labour and looking at unlicensed gangmasters, that's how we do our work. We've got an extension of our remit now. So my ex-CEO, Paul Broadbent, always said that we had an extra A embroidered onto our polo shirts now. The GLA became the GLAA. But we've got a director of market enforcement, and he sets the strategy over the year. It's important now that we've got additional powers under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Whereas before we were reliant wholly on our Gangmasters Licensing Act, now we've got much wider powers in order to tackle this high-level labour exploitation. This, coupled together with an extension of our remit and a bigger workforce, we've now got labour abuse prevention officers, and a great deal of those are ex-police officers. And we've now got 2 instruments that we can use: a labour market enforcement undertaking, whereas if we come across a business that is consistently not paying the workers properly, not paying their annual leave, and that there's low-level exploitative practice for whatever reason, we will serve an undertaking, and they have that undertaking to create remedial action. If not, we will create a labour market enforcement order, and the penalty for that is a 2-year custodial sentence, and we've just had one at the beginning of this month, and it was a 2-year custodial sentence suspended. It allows us to go in and tackle these repeated labour market offenders, those that phoenix, those that start companies, finish them close them down without paying workers properly, and then start again. But more importantly, it gives us an information hub. Just as with the police and just with the statistics that Parosha was talking about earlier and the Minister, none of this is any good unless we've got intelligence and that we all talk to each other, and this is a partnership agreement, okay? So we're intelligence-led and risk-based. This will help you identify your single points of failure in the supply chain. Well, modern slavery, myth or reality? Is it a myth? Does it happen in the UK? Well, yes, it does. Does it only happen in the shadow economy? Nope. Is it always by foreign overseas workers? No. It's about people that are duped very often, and there's 3 elements to the Modern Slavery Act. Have they been forced? Have they been deceived? Or have they been coerced? And those are the 3 elements always to remember. Are those workers kept under lock and key? No. And in fact, many of those workers actually have their IDs. And I get asked time and time again, well, why didn't they just run away? Well, if you're talking about the maritime industry, that's a bit difficult, isn't it? And if you're talking about the master of the ship always having, as I understand it in some cases, the right to actually hold the identity documents of workers, because that's the way it's been done, you've got a long way, you've got a cultural shift to change. The reality is it will be within your supply chains, and you know that. It introduces criminality into your business, and it is a significant source of income for the exploiter. I'm an ex-police officer, and if I was told that there were drugs in a car, we would stop the car, take out the drugs, and hopefully deal with the perpetrator. What would you do if there is a minibus full of workers on their way to work in one of the factories? Would you stop the vehicle? No. But each and every one of those workers is an individual way of making far more money than ever the drugs, or in some circumstances, guns could ever produce. 45 million people, it's estimated, and I'm not going to steal the thunder because I expect somebody's going to be talk in far more depth about indicators in modern slavery. But 45 million people in the world, 10 to 13,000 in the UK. 31 million UK working population, and out of that 10.8 million are in high-risk industries, and that includes agriculture, fishing, food packing, processing. How many cranes did you see on the way here? How much construction have you seen on the way here? Each and every one of those sites has got low-skill workers working on site, and each and every one of those sites has got very short-term contracts. These workers are an opportunity for multiple exploitation. It's about looking at your supply chains. That product that's being created out at sea has got to land somewhere, and it's about looking into that supply chain. The reputational risks, well, I don't have to tell you that, do I, really? But worker participation in this is the key approach. The only way you are ever going to find out if there's exploitative process in your supply chains is to talk to your workers. There's somebody going to be talking about auditing later. I can tell you that the cases that I've dealt with, whoever controls the accommodation oftentimes controls the worker. Maritime situation, it's all there in one go, isn't it? Okay, so speak to your workers. If your workers have been deliberately chosen because they can't speak the language, and that's a reason that they can't flag up that there's something wrong, you've got to make every effort to be able for them to speak to you in their own language. Okay, don't use somebody else who is working within your industry in order to rely on, because you don't know what their agenda is. Isolation is one of the biggest indicators of modern slavery. It is vital who you use to interpret for you. Finally, if you're going to start looking at your supply chains, you've got to have the correct training in order to identify what's going on. That training has got to be refreshed. It's got to be cascaded down into an ever-changing workforce. And once you've uncovered a victim, what do you do next? What are your processes? When you go back to your workplaces, and this will only ever happen on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock when everybody else has gone home, what are your processes within your company to manage that victim and next steps? Okay? Do you have a single point of contact within your supply chains in order to deal with this? Oops. Shipping agencies, especially within the Philippines, I've been speaking to people that there's an awful lot of Ukrainian sailors. There's little auditing and no regulation. So the Minister alluded to the ILO, so I'm not going to go into any more detail with that. But a lot of these workers have crushing debts. that they've taken on, either with inflated work finding fees. Those work finding fees often have interest added to them on a monthly basis. But this highlights, doesn't it, the problems that NGOs and the maritime charities have got to face. Yeah? How do you give those workers a voice? And it's got to change from the top down. Within our Immigration Act, we've now got powers to board vessels, along with the National Crime Agency, UK Border Agency and HMRC. And we rely heavily on the Coast Guard Agency to conduct their checks and share that information across the board. Now, this is early days stage. Even with the UK Border Agency, who are very reluctant to share information, but this is what it's all about. It's a collaborative approach. There is a huge reliance upon the seafarer charities in order to provide support and deal with this problem. In terms of workers actually on board ships, the GLA, we often view it the same way as we do domestic servitude. When a worker is bought, stuck behind closed doors, he or she very often doesn't have a voice, and that's very much the same as a maritime vessel. Okay? So wherever there's a high turnover in workforce, and you've got low-skilled workers who have low expectations, oftentimes they say, well, at least I've been paid. They haven't been paid anywhere near what they're supposed to, but at least they've been paid, and that's their mindset. Whenever you've got long or complex supply chains, or the subcontracting is informal, if it's auditing and you're dealing with a whole group of people, and you're speaking to multiple people all at one time, is that person actually going to flag up that there's a problem? If they're naturally mistrustful of authority and they've come from a region where you don't trust any authority, and oftentimes the very person that is conducting exploitative behaviour is not that far away from them, are they actually going to say that there's an issue? No, they're not. So this is about making sure that with your training you actually know where you're going to speak to these individuals. Legitimate businesses are always a target. There are always people looking to make money out of vulnerable people. So do you remember I said earlier, several streams of income? Well, false bank accounts, benefits, making money on accommodation, making money on transport, work finding fees. And I've got their Brexit. Well, I'm not going to go into any detail because I'm not an expert on that. But wherever there is going to be a squeeze on labour, there is going to be an exploitative process that follows that. Well, the government strategy is to introduce a broader and harder edge of enforcement for labour market offences and forced labour. But what it does do is it ensures that there's a level playing field for legitimate competition. And the licensing of the food and drink industry, initially resistant by major supermarkets, has now proven that licensing works. But we're not big enough as an organisation to be able to do anything like that. We have pilot schemes to license nail bars and car washes because that's where the largest part of exploitative behaviour is happening. But be mindful that whoever could be working within your supply chains won't always just work within the maritime industry. They are a way to make money, so they will be moved around. Okay? It's about the enforcing authorities working together collaboratively. And we're responsible for investigating more serious cases of labour market abuse involved in modern slavery. We have 150 live cases on the go at the moment. There's a video, Amanda.
Yes, indeed.
Seamless. It's very annoying music, by the way. very frenetic music. I'm sorry about that. That gives you an idea of some of the problems that we are dealing with the Gangmasters Labour Abuses Authority. And up there was a mention of fishing. Do we know what's going on in the fishing and maritime sector? No, because it's all about sharing that intelligence. It's about sharing that information. Do we all need to work together in partnership for this? Yes, we do. And it's about having that confidence to share that intelligence. And we are here and we will support you and to help you in any way that we can. I always finish something with putting the Modern Slavery Helpline up there, because this isn't just about you in your businesses, this is about you in your everyday lives. So put the Modern Slavery Helpline number into your mobile phone. But if you want any further information from us as an organisation, we'll be very happy to help you. Thank you very much.